Okay, full disclosure, it's been pretty hot here in the UK over these last couple of weeks, and being in the middle of summer and I've got children, it's been a family oriented couple of weeks. Even though I've been a week off work, very little has been done on the 75. So I thought for this episode I'll give you a bit of a recap as to how I got to this position with the car. So best place I can find for the beginning of this story is the first Alfa Romeo that I had, which is this Alfa Romeo Alfa Sud for Alfa South. It's labelled as an SC 1.3, which is how I bought it in a various state repair very, very cheaply for I think £500 here in the UK as a means of getting me the 12 miles to and from work every day after I moved house as a second car. This was a bit of a risk, especially to anyone who knew Alfa Suds. I didn't know Alfa Romeos at all at this point. I'd had a lot of Volkswagens and Audis and things like that up to this point. And this car was a new venture for me. And it was completely game-changing in terms of car driving for me. I mean, it's a very unique car. This one is definitely not original. 1 second. I think I need a beverage to enjoy this story time myself. So the car was bought, I believe in it was around Bognor area, if anyone is local to the south coast of England, and brought back to me near Portsmouth. Like I mentioned, the car's not original. It had had previous welding. It had original wheels, which were interesting because the tyre fitments were metric. So the only tyres you could purchase were very expensive vintage tyres for the correct fitment. So they were quickly swapped out for KN diamonds, which is what you see in the pictures of the car of anything past the purchase date. These are kind of like period correct aftermarket wheels, I guess. But yeah, that was fitting. So the car itself, like I mentioned, is an SC 1.3, but it became very apparent when I started to do a top-end rebuild on the engine, which is, I guess, more of a left and right rebuild, since it's a flat engine. It became apparent that the block itself was from a 1.5 engine. The heads were still the 1.3 heads, and it had the 1.5 twin carb setup, twin Delortos. I forget the sizing. 36, 38 sounds correct. Not 100% sure, but it was pretty nippy for what it was. But they're really, really interesting cars to drive. If anyone else has ever given one a spin, they have a very low centre of gravity thanks to the front transaxle and inboard brakes and a flat engine that's very, very low down in the car's profile. Not to mention the fact that the bodywork lightens itself over the years because it's all made of very thin metal which loves to rust. Yeah, and inevitably that was where this car ended with me. The rust got to a point where my 90 amp hobby welder would only create bird poo on the metal or blow holes through it, and I just couldn't dial that in. I had no idea. Well, I'm no great welder now, but by now standards, I was absolutely terrible back then. So it wasn't to be kept. I couldn't keep it. I sold it on. I actually sold it for £50 more than I bought it for. Although a lot of good experience. A whole top end rebuild, had all the valves out. They were all cleaned back and lapped back in, and gave it a mild port cleaning up, and completely rebuilt the carburetors. And you know, these are all things that I've never done before. I'd never changed the cam belt up to that point either. So that was interesting. There's 2 of them on this engine, in case you wondered. Yeah, it was a really good experience. The car was loads of fun to drive. If anyone ever gives you a chance to drive an Alfa Sud or an Alfa 33, I would jump at the chance. They're really good fun. This one with twin carbs sounded like an old rally car, which my neighbours loved. I had no money whatsoever to spend on the car in my situation back then, so it was very much, I'll keep it going as best I can. So that meant when the rear exhaust section rusted through, that came off the car, and I fashioned a side exit exhaust, and yeah, it was much louder. It sounded really cool in a race car kind of way, but it was pretty impractical. I'm pretty sure there was rust holes in the floor, so where it wasn't quite kicking the bodywork underneath, it was probably filling the cabin and slowly killing me. But it was good fun. It would have been a fun death, but it wasn't something I needed to keep, especially as I had 3 young daughters at the time. So that car was sold to some very, very nice chaps who were taking it away to try and restore it. And I'd imagine it'd be worth a lot of money now if it ever got restored. The license plate always made me chuckle because it spells out OYOY, which is what a lot of people would tell me when they heard that I'd bought an Alfa Sud. Mostly people to my senior who had grown up with them around, and they were notorious for rusting even like 2-3 years after production. Mainly due to, I believe, they were manufactured in the south of Italy, and the chassis were manufactured and welded together and then left outside untreated and then bought in on batch to complete as cars. So the chassis had some weathering before they even saw paint. So anyway, that car disappeared. That was sold. And I had to scratch the itch. So not long after this was sold, I actually found another Alfa which ticked even more crazy boxes. It still had inboard brakes at the rear this time, and transaxle at the rear again, and it was rear wheel drive, which is something I hadn't experienced yet either at this point. And it had this funky engine which had 8 spark plugs, even though it had 4 cylinders, and it had a cam advance, a bit like VTEC from early years. I'm not sure who came first with it, but it was certainly interesting. What was interesting about the 75 is that I actually learnt enough that I could pull the EEPROM out of the ECU and reprogram it, so I could change when the cam advance would come in and change things like the red line, and you could map the whole thing from within this software as well. I never went that adventurous, mainly because I had no experience with mapping cars, and the software had no safe boundaries or anything like that of like modern mapping software. It was just hard-coded values, so I left that be and just did some minor things, upped the rev limit slightly, and yeah, had some fun with the cam advance, because you could bring it in from like 2,000 RPM if you wanted to. I think its factory it was like 4,000, around 4,000 RPM. But yeah, that was good fun. This wasn't a clean example. It had some rust in lots of places. I did try and fix that. The fuel tank was completely rotten around all the fittings. I don't know if anyone's ever had a twin spark before, but they undersling the fuel tank in a traditional manner under the boot floor, whereas the V6 engines, the fuel tank's in the boot. It's more like a 50-gallon drum behind the seats than underslung. It's built for the back of the boot, and because of that, obviously, it doesn't really corrode because it's tucked away technically inside the boot itself. So anyway, that rotten through. So again, not a lot of money to do things. So I bought an alloy fuel cell. I'm not really sure what I was thinking when I bought that. It wasn't particularly big either. I think it was maybe 25-30 litres tops. Probably not even that. It looked nice enough, probably manufactured in China, and then spliced in some AN fittings and bits and bobs to make that function as I needed it. That was good fun trying to figure that side out. A bit scary, and used to freak out lots of fuel attendants because this guy would just pull up in this rusty old Alfa and proceed to pop his boot and then just look like he's filling up the boot with fuel. Obviously the fuel tank was inside, as was the filler. So yeah, lots of strange looks and people coming out and shouting at me, but it did for the time. The car was lots of fun. I did some stupid stuff in it, mainly as I was enjoying the fact that it was the first rear-wheel drive car I'd ever had, and that involved maybe going a little bit sideways on a roundabout and looking like a complete idiot as I stuffed it into the roundabout and smashed the splitter in pieces, which was a bit of a shame, especially as I see the prices of Veloce bumpers these days. That was probably quite an expensive mistake. So the car, I did get repaired from that little accident, and did various other things to it, including fashioning a cone filter mount for the end of the airflow meter, and various other little tinkery bits around the car. The car itself, which I didn't really mention, when I went to buy it, I got it from a place in Westbury, which is north of, I don't know, maybe it's within Dorset, but it's like north of Dorset and the New Forest area. So it was a nice drive out and drive back, obviously. A good friend, Rich, over at Southways Automotive, helped me out with getting the car back. I think he even drove it back and loved the loved the drive of it. The car came with lots of optional bits, which I personally love and would have been my choices in sourcing components. So it had a Momo Super Indy 1985 wheel, I think, which is like a teak wood with slight dish on aluminium. You've probably seen lots of Momo Indies and Super Indies now, but this was one of the old school ones. They seem pretty sought after, and I love the wheel. It was actually on my wall for quite a few years. So I had one of those. It had the Recaro interior, not all of it, just the seats. The door cards were not Recaros, they were just sort of a fabric similar to the Recaro seats. It had Revolution wheels. Now I can't remember the exact names. Maybe RFX comes to my head. Maybe it's an RFX. It's a 15-inch wheel. It's a 3-piece split wheel. So you've got the inner drum, which is the majority of the section that falls in cross section with the tyre, and then you have the fascia, which is the design of the wheel, the face of it, along with the stud pattern, so mounting it to the actual hub. And then you have the outer lip, which bolts the outside. Now all three of those components are brought together with a bit of sealant, and then the tyre pops over the top like a traditional wheel. This means that you can use dissimilar alloys. So I believe it's a stainless steel rim, and then it's a aluminium or some sort of alloy face, and the result of that is that these wheels are incredibly light, really surprisingly light. You pick one up and it's one of the lightest wheels I've ever handled. So there was that. I don't think there was much else different about the car. It was a twin spark with a full Veloce kit. It had parts of a CSC exhaust system. I think just the rear, the back box. The rest of it was standard. There was certainly no manifold or anything like that. But yeah, it was a good car. I love driving it, and I drove it to and from work. I used it as an alternative to the pool cars at work. I used to work for the NHS in their IT, and driving around various doctors' surgeries, helping them out, and they'd see me coming in that car, knew who they had for the day. But yeah, it was good fun. Unfortunately, that also succumbed to a lot of rust in places that you don't want rust, near chassis rails. The boot floor rotted through at the back corner like they often do on the 75s, and that was repaired. I don't actually recall. I think Rich at Southways helped me out with welding in a basic formed, sheet folded panel in the boot floor so that I could slightly undersling the fuel tank, so I got a bit more boot space back, and it helped me mount it in there a bit better. But there was all sorts of rot in places that at the time I didn't have the facilities to deal with, and I needed a car that was very reliable. So unfortunately, this car ended up being off the road, and then I took the bits that I wanted, replaced them with some other 75 parts, and a chap bought the car for restoration. He had all sorts of parts, and then it turned out that he actually wanted parts out of it. I think he parted the engine out, which obviously a twin spark engine, so that went off to I think a Julia conversion, and the rest of the car ended up going to scrap because he didn't even finish the signing over the papers before I got a note saying your car's no longer sawned, it's in a scrapyard. So that one died a death, which is a shame because I had a bit of a story with it. And I'll show you a little clip of it on a rolling road. So as you can see, here's the results. From the other cars that have been on this rolling road, it seems fairly honest. And I would say that Alfa's power figures are not always true to life. I'd say it's a bit of a dice roll. But this one was okay. It certainly had enough power. It was good fun to drive, but the 2 litre, although it's a good sounding 2 litre engine with the exhaust it had, it didn't have the thrill of a 3 litre or a Busso V6 as everyone's sought after. So that was obviously next on the cards, and I kept my ear to the ground. I saw many a 75 come up through Piston Heads and eBay and all sorts of other places. I don't think Facebook Marketplace was around at the time. But I kept digging and searching around and keeping an eye on things. And then one came up, I think it was on Gumtree, and it was a chap in Hook or Lip Hook, I forget which, but not too far up the road from me. And he'd bought the car initially for the engine. He was going to put it into a Lancia Stratos kit car, which didn't come to fruition in the end. They changed plans. So then they kept the car and started to strip it for track use. They wanted a track car out of it, so it was bare metal inside. It had 2 passenger side grey leather front seats when I bought the car, and they were in very bad condition. One of them wasn't bolted down, the driver's seat, which was fun. But then I got the car anyway. Long story short, I bought the car. The guy offered to deliver it to me for £25 extra, so I bit his hand off because that would have been a nightmare to get back otherwise for me. and all in, I got a 3-litre America, Alfa Romeo 725. So America's the trim and the spec, and I got that delivered to my house for £175, which by anyone's money is very, very cheap for a 75. So I was immediately skeptical about the car. I drove it into the parking space, and then you would have seen this video before. To which I immediately started stripping the car down. I didn't want any temptation to start the engine up again, because although it was very cheap, I didn't want to destroy it, and I had aspirations of getting the car on the road, at least as some sort of road going track car, if I couldn't find all the parts. But you know, I had the majority of the parts I needed in this twin spark still to save the 3-litre, so that's where the majority of the interior, the wheels, and various other bits, including bits of trim, have come from for the 3-litre. It'd be a lot easier if I had a name for this car, but it's just a 75 3-litre. Who knows? Maybe I'll name it at some point, but that's not really my bag. You know, anyone has any suggestions, feel free to throw them my way. So obviously that's where the 3-litre came into my life, and that was, you know, getting close to 10 years ago now. I still wasn't in a great place financially, had a young family, and where I was, it was a shared car park. So the 75 was not road going, it was sawned, no insurance, no MOT obviously. So it was in a private car park technically. So it wasn't public land, so it was okay to be parked there. Either way, I wasn't particularly happy about the car being there, so I was just working through things as quickly as I could. A friend of mine, a guy called Nick, came and helped me with some welding. I had 2 rear arch repair panels welded in, cut out the originals, welded some new ones in. 2 whole outer sills, so for both sides. I believe we ended on only doing the the passenger side sill and some A-pillar repairs, and then the driver's side we ended up with just a patch. This is how it was at the time, and you know, Nick did me a favour there. It wasn't particularly expensive, and that was it for what I did outside the house. I then pulled the engine, fully rebuilt from the ground up, so everything was stripped down, cleaned, and reassembled after I'd taken the crankshaft to Saunders Engineering, which is over in the New Forest, to check the journals, make sure there was no wear, see if I needed any kind of like oversized bearings and things before I put the order in for those. Turns out that the engine was like new. It was fitted on the book figures pretty much exactly, so there was nothing out of the ordinary in the bottom end, which I was very thankful for. The valves were nice and straight. There was no excessive corrosion anywhere. It was good, apart from the scary fact that the water pump was knackered, and the piston rings, a few of those were a bit shot, so they were seeping some oil and getting a bit of blow by, and hence all the smoke out the exhaust. So you know, there was all sorts that needed doing there, but the engine got fully rebuilt, and it sat fully rebuilt for a little while with me, and then it got transported, the car and the engine, down to my in-laws' house at the time, where the car sat actually off of any shared car park, so it was on a driveway, which gave me a little bit more room to do work on the car. The front end then needed some work, so the 75 has a scuttle panel which runs in front of the windscreen. So I'll see if I can find a diagram here. It has a lip that goes across the bottom of the windscreen, which is what the plastic panel behind the bonnet or hood sits onto. And then directly beneath that is like a cavity, which is where the fresh air would be drawn into the heater matrix and blower for cold air into the cabin, or fresh air through the heater. If you want hot air, but still fresh air anyway, rather than it coming in from the engine bay. So there's a seal at the top of the engine bay which segregates those off, and that section there also acts as a drainaway for water. It can drain out of either corner. There's a hole into each wheel arch, and in the centre there's a drain hole which goes into a pipe and then drains down the side of what would be a gearbox, but it's just a like a bell housing on the back of the engine, and then drains to the floor there. That always gets full of crap, leaves, soil, dead animals, who knows, something clogs it up, no water can get through, and then water fills up. The water fills, sits on top of the factory seam sealer, and any degradation in the paint, any scrapes, chips or anything like that, and if it gets any chance, it starts to rot all the metal away up there. It rotted the panel that is in the centre of that, so I had Nick come around again, and he cut out that section and formed me, with some basic tools, a new shield that goes around where the matrix is, which keeps all the water out of it. A little too tall than I needed, and unfortunately by the time he'd done that, welded everything back in, including the scuttle, I had no access whatsoever to then seal up the metal in the welds that he'd done. So I did my best. I used zinc primer, seam sealer, and then painted with a specific engine bay chassis black from Frost, thinking, I know I'll get some good quality products and hopefully that gets me out of the crap here. Now the engine bay used to look like this, which in my opinion looks great. The engine looks great in there because of the sort of like textured black of the paint. Unfortunately that didn't last whatsoever. So within a couple of years that all started to peel off in places and looked disgusting, because the thing with textured paint in a car that's sitting up, spiders' webs, leaves, dust, anything gets ingrained into that textured paint, and then it's very hard to get off again. You can't just pressure wash it down very easily. It's scrubbing it off with brushes, and then obviously you're doing the paint no favours. So I won't be doing that again, but it did look like this, nice and finished, especially with the engine in there. I did some level of assembly here. We got the downpipes onto the engine. No, I think we just had the headers, no downpipes. And basic assembly, all the wiring was back in, plumbing. Didn't put any coolant in it yet because we had no intentions of running it very long. And I couldn't get the car started. And now something that's probably worth mentioning to anyone who's interested in getting one of these. Not sure you'd want to be after watching this series, if I'm honest. But there is a cable right near the battery terminal which is entirely sheathed in black. Looks like it should purposefully screw to the side of the battery connector on the negative side, but in fact it should not be. It is a live cable which feeds, I believe it feeds the high current area on the starter. So when I was starting the car, I was creating a short circuit, burn out some connectors, which you would have seen in episode 2, I think, which I've obviously started to replace now, and I know the wiring, and I'm replacing it with relays, so it's all low current from now on. But I've also cut back the sheath on this cable and put some red electrical tape around it to make it very obvious where it goes. Which, who knows, that's not foolproof, but you know, it's better than it was. So anyway, after fixing that, I was able to hotwire the engine started, and we had it running very briefly. Here is a video. Now, obviously that wasn't very long. I did have it running for a little bit longer after that, but you couldn't run it for very long because obviously it only had exhaust headers, so any pops and bangs and everything like that were going out of a tube that was about a foot long and directly underneath the car, shooting at the floor. So it was very loud, generated a lot of heat down there, and yeah, it wasn't very sociable for the neighbours. So with that, the car then was sat for a little while whilst I tinkered, sorting out some other bits and bobs. The front wings, they got painted by myself, which looked okay. I'd say okay. Bit of orange peel after I put the lacquer on, which was a bit of a kick in the teeth because it looked immaculate before that. But you know, it was a DIY job, and they have stood the test of time for rust. At least they've stayed sealed. So the car then got transferred over to a friend of mine's workshop. I'd accumulated quite a lot of hours of IT and workshop time, helping him out with various projects, rewiring a CNC router, doing some specific customer projects for him, making parts for race cars and things. And unfortunately that never really saw any reward or much reward because the business itself couldn't fulfill it. He had no time to repay me with workshop time. So the initial barter, which was that he'd take on the 75 and finish up and get the road going, MOT'd and such, never came through. So the car sat there. The workshop actually changed hands, but they were happy for me to keep the car there until they found a new home for it. Unfortunately, I think a truck backed into it at that point and wrote off one of the wings. Thankfully, just the wing, nothing else. And also had a spare wing for that side, which is just miraculous. Then the car eventually got moved to Rich's garage. So it's, you know, back full circle. Back with Rich and one of my 75s. So I'd imagine there was lots of sighing and eye rolling when he initially saw it. It needed a lot of work. Primarily, it came to his, and we thought, right, we'll start from one end, work to the other. So the first up was a wheel well needed to be welded in because the previous wheel well itself was rotten through, as the boot floor was pretty patchy as well. So we couldn't source a 75 wheel well. I've still not managed to find anything like that. They're very few and far between repair panels for the 75. Unless you want rear arches or sills, there's barely anything out there. Thankfully, a Julia 105's wheel well is nigh on identical in size. I think it's actually slightly deeper or slightly shallower, I forget which, but it's very, very minimal, and it fitted inside the diameter of the hole in the boot floor quite nicely. So again, Rich helped me out there. You know, I did some work for him, he did some work on my car. It worked quite well to a point, but then the car basically sat up because it was low on my priorities. I just bought a house. It was low on Rich's priorities because he's running a business and needs to earn money, and he has many of his own projects. If you've not seen his channel, it's Up and Down on YouTube. Go take a look, you'll see exactly what I mean. And the car, you know, it got relegated to the sidelines, and you know, Rich really helped me out by storing the car whilst it wasn't being worked on until I had a place for it. And now it's back with me. Complete with a wheel well, and what you see on this channel is me trying to make good on this car with anything I've got at my disposal. I don't have huge budgets, but I'm not as desperate as I was when I first got my Twin Spark or my Alfa Sud. So, you know, I can invest in good tradesmen to do bits of work that I can't do to that sort of quality. But anything I can try and do myself, I will try, as long as it's not massively detrimental to the car. I will definitely try first before I go seek professional help, with the exception, I think, of paint. I think paint this time around, I'd quite like to get it oven baked and yeah, just professionally done in all one go. So we'll work towards that. But as you've seen so far, there's many things to take care of, and something which I have been working on and not documenting particularly well is the welding. I will find a way of getting some better either pictures or video of me doing the work, but it's quite hard work. You know, you're talking about at least doubling the time to record the work, and I have minimal amounts of time to work on the car as it is. So, you know, I want to try and keep progressing with it, and that's the reason for these videos, is to keep me honest and keep me chipping away at it. But obviously, if that becomes detriment to me fixing the car, I need to really focus on getting that done and just, you know, document as much as I can. So yeah, that's a bit of a long story today, but hopefully you enjoyed a bit of background. I'm always open to any questions you've got about the car. Like, this is my second, and I have had, I'm pretty certain, every nut and bolt undone on the 75 at some point, with the exception of the gearbox internals. But who knows, maybe that'll happen. Guess we'll see what condition it's in. It's only driven a few feet, so I don't know if it's got a whiny third or whatever. But yeah, any questions you have that I can help answer, feel free to drop me a comment. I can give you my email address, we can talk. I've found lots of parts that I couldn't find previously, which I'll share links to. I took on the domain name of alfaromeo75.co.uk from the previous chat, because it ran derelict after it was a forum. I will try and put everything that I do on here on there also. I need to make it streamlined so that it's not taking up all my time, but I will do that, and all the links to any of the storefronts and products that I can find that are worthwhile sharing. I've got no affiliate links. I'm not earning any money out of this, certainly nothing from YouTube, but I'm not getting any kickback for anything I'm trying to sell on there. I'm purely sharing links of things that I've found which will definitely be useful to other people in my situation. So go and take a look, and yeah, hopefully next time you'll see me maybe in a welding mask or with copious amounts of seam sealer all over the bodywork, because that's always what happens when I go use seam sealer. It just gets everywhere. So yeah, look forward to seeing you on the next one, and get back to work. Cheers.